Good day. Welcome to Dutchess Talk Radio. Dutchess Talk Radio, produced by Sharc Creative. Made possible by Robeson Oil, the house that service built. By, also to, Michael Labriola, landscape design and construction of Armonk in Westchester. Also by Hightower Westchester, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard up and down throughout the Hudson Valley. And by Jaguar Land Rover all throughout the Hudson Valley, including in New Rochelle, White Plains, and Mount Kisco. We are joined by Dutchess County Executive Marc Molinaro. Marc Molinaro, welcome back. And got to ask you, first of all, here we are almost midway through 2022. How are things shaping up according to your plan for the year in Dutchess?
Listen, he said this. I delivered the State of the County address a couple of weeks ago, which I'm required to do. But the fiscal condition of Dutchess County couldn't be stronger. Dutchess County government is strong, but acknowledging that we have the highest bond rating of any county in the state, continue to tax, borrow, and spend less than most other counties in the state of New York, and have made massive investments in mental health, law enforcement, public safety, veterans, seniors, families, kids, and infrastructure. Acknowledging all of that, we also acknowledge that despite the county government being in a very strong place, small businesses, families, and farmers are not. The challenges are enormously great for the average family. And so what we have been focused on is not only strengthening the county's fiscal condition, but investing in people and in places and the things that make life better for Dutchess County residents. And this year, when I delivered the State of the County, we're talking a great deal about providing relief, taxpayer relief. This year, Dutchess County delivered the largest property tax levy reduction in history, $5.2 million. We provided a sales tax exemption that relates to about $14.5 million in taxpayer savings. And we're the first county in the state to cut and cap the gas tax. We think the federal and state government need to do the same. State government moving forward with that as well. But at the same time, we're focused on investing in our community. And that means providing support to law enforcement and emergency responders, making a difference to try to drive down the cost of housing. And housing affordability is a major, major crisis and challenge for residents, but also effectively dealing with mental health and substance use, treatment, addiction, and prevention services. So we have a full plate, and we've got a lot going our way, but we recognize the challenges facing ordinary families.
Now, you have a bigger picture to concern yourself with, too. You are the Republican candidate for Congress in the 19th Congressional District, covering Dutchess County, much of the Hudson Valley into the Catskills, and all the way up into the Albany Capital District and Region 2. Antonio Delgado, who's a Democrat and has held that position, seemingly was about to be your opponent until Governor Kathy Hochul selected him to be her new lieutenant with the resignation of Brian Benjamin. Now, I keep hearing different things from different people I talk to, different election boards people, different people in public office about, and different media people as to what the procedure is now to replace Antonio Delgado, of course, affecting you. What's the latest as you know it?
Well, let me just pull back 1 second just to say that Governor Hochul appointed Brian Benjamin lieutenant governor while there was a federal corruption investigation underway. And the Democrats in the state Senate and the state assembly, maybe they didn't want to do it, but they changed the law. In the middle of all of this, they changed the law to allow the governor to jettison Brian Benjamin and select a new lieutenant governor. And I'd offer that under ordinary circumstances, that actually makes sense. If someone has to be removed from the ballot, why force that onto voters? But to do it in the midst of the election, to change the law only to benefit one person, is not only suspect, it's inappropriate. But here we are. The governor selected Antonio Delgado. I wished him well. In fact, I reached out to him and congratulated him. I give him. I have a great deal of hope that he can confront and perhaps restore a bit of dignity to that office. Of course, I think the direction that they're steering the state in is not in our best interest. But that said, the governor's announced that he will be selected lieutenant governor, but he has not yet been appointed lieutenant governor. And what that means is he remains a member of Congress while basically serving as lieutenant governor. He has declined the nomination to run for re-election for Congress, so he is no longer the candidate for the 19th congressional district, wherever that is, and we should talk about redistricting at some point. But and I'm now in a position where we're waiting for district lines to be finalized and waiting for an opponent. But I'll offer to you that over the course of the last 7 months, I've been campaigning since September. But I know the communities. We talked about this. I know the community leaders, the businesses, the elected officials throughout the 19th district well. I ran statewide. When I ran statewide for governor, I won the seat. And we've been to thousands of events, meeting with thousands upon thousands of residents, and building up a campaign because I care deeply about trying to provide common sense and reasonable representation, good quality representation of the people of this district. I thought we were going to win already. I think we're going to win in November, but that's up to voters, not me. And we're just waiting for the governor to make a decision. If she appoints him lieutenant governor prior to July 1st, then she'll be forced to call a special election. We want that. We're ready to go. If she doesn't appoint him by July 1st, then we just simply move to the general election in November.
Now, you brought up redistricting, and we haven't seen or heard the last about this. The special master has to do what the special master does and redistrict again. It might come close to what the Democrats have laid out there so far. How does this affect everything, too?
Yeah, so the good news is the partisan gerrymandering the Democrats in Albany, really at the direction of the Democrats in Washington, engaged in was thrown out. A Democratic court said they're unconstitutional. The court's right. They're not constitutional. New York State's constitution was amended by you and voters across the state of New York. And so the court has appointed a special master. Wouldn't you like that title? Special master. We're not even the special masters in our own house.
It sounds like something you do on a golf course, basically.
Yeah, I know. Well, I for some reason, I always think of fishing or something. I was like, I don't know what,
Yeah, so we got golf, we got fishing, and we can stop 10 different people on the street. We'd get a different answer.
Different answer. So this independent individual is to craft new district lines. He will deliver them next week, Monday or Tuesday, several days of public hearings, and then they become the lines for the congressional seat, congressional districts and the state Senate districts. If history's any indication, he would work from the existing map, right? The 2012 map. The Republicans submitted a new set of maps for the special master. The Democrats submitted a new set of maps for the special master. They basically keep the district similar to what it is, but make it more compact, which really it's really the law. But whatever the lines are, wherever they end up, I am very confident in our ability to work hard. And my goal is to listen to and learn from the voters and earn their vote. And again, we kind of joked about it, but I'll say it again. We shouldn't be in a scenario where partisan politicians pick their voters. Elections, and this election isn't about Joe Biden. It's not about Nancy Pelosi. It's not about Antonio Delgado or Marc Molinaro. It's about voters and how they confront the challenges before them, and they should be selecting who they think will represent them the best.
Now, because of all of this, the primary was supposed to be about a month away in late June. Now, this will occur at least for governor, at least for Congress and state Senate. That's going to be in August, isn't it?
It's all over the place. So the statewide primaries and the primaries for the New York State Assembly will be in June. And for those that have primaries for Congress and the state Senate, those will be August 23rd. I've submitted petitions. We don't have a primary election. I'll be the Republican and conservative candidate for this district. But if you live in a congressional seat or Senate seat with a primary, that's going to happen in August. And to make things even more confusing, right, if the governor does appoint Antonio Delgado and we end up with a special election, that could be August 23rd. It could be the 15th of August. We could have 3 or 4 elections. So I jokingly just say, I don't yet have an opponent. We don't yet have a district, but I have a mission. And my mission is to go out and earn the support and the votes of the people of this district.
Now, I've heard some talk that the Democrats may not run anybody against you if Antonio Delgado does become lieutenant governor, or they might run a token candidate. And you talked about Kathy Hochul doing things in her best interest. Think about this for a second. When she took office as governor, she said, I am a Joe Biden Democrat. Part of my responsibility is to help create as many congressional seats as possible for Democrats in the state of New York. And yet she seems maybe willing to sacrifice the 19th seat to help her out with Delgado I guess eventually replacing Benjamin, still to be seen, obviously.
Well, we'll have an opponent. I mean, there's no question that I will have an opponent. And so the question is who and when. But to your point, no matter who that is, they will have been selected in this sort of corrupted backroom deal. And I use the term appropriately, corrupted. The rules were changed in order to accomplish a particular goal. The decision for whether or not there'll be a special election and who will be represented will be based on the Democrats' political expedience. Whatever is in their best interest will be the result of all of this. And that's not in the interest of voters. And it isn't in the best interest of the district. And I would say this if it were a Republican governor. I don't think you change the rules. I don't think you pick candidates in backroom deals. And I don't think that the voters should be secondary. They should be principal, primary, and the focus of why we run. And so, as I said, I'm working hard to earn the support, despite the fact that they just continually change the rules to benefit themselves.
Marc Molinaro, Dutchess County Executive here on Dutchess Talk Radio. He is the Republican and conservative candidate in the 19th Congressional District. Upcoming race for that, whenever that might be, whenever that happens to take place. There could be a special election to replace Antonio Delgado if he becomes lieutenant governor as expected. If you go to Washington, you will have numerous, I got a sheet of paper here with, I could tack a lot more onto this sheet over here that I have.
It's almost there.
A little
Your
bit
green
of
screen's taking it away.
And there's light, and it's a long sheet, long list of issues you'll have to deal with in D.C. For example, Joe Biden's Build Back Better, which we hear he still would like to pass in some way, shape, or form. I read an article right before we got together here that said Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona might have voted for Build Back Better, but there was a meeting between Democrats of all stripes, representatives from the House and senators also too, in which Joe Biden revealed details, maybe accidentally, maybe on purpose, of a confidential meeting that his people had with Sinema about how they would approach what she thought the bill should be. She got ticked off about that. Maybe that helped determine her vote against BBB. Do we need Build Back Better? And the infrastructure bill, which kind of got taken out of that, went into place. Your thoughts on that infrastructure bill? Donald Trump said no, other Republicans say yes, and I guess it kind of cuts right down the middle.
Well, here's the thing. Moving forward, yeah, we ought to be investing in infrastructure, but we ought to be very careful. I've lived through many infrastructure bills over the course of my service. And what ends up happening too often is Washington directs infrastructure dollars to special interests that have very little to do with infrastructure. Beyond that, and I think President Biden has done this, directs too much and gives too much control to state capitals. So governors, in many cases, get the dollars first. And what all that means is that too much of the trillions of your taxpayer money never makes it to the roads and the bridges. And so I'm all for making investment infrastructure. We've done that effectively in my community, and I support infrastructure investment. I have certainly my whole public service life. And the Northeast and New England have among the most aged, outdated, antiquated, and dangerous highways, roads, and bridges in the country. So that's a failure, by the way, by state governments in many ways to put resources on the ground. I'm concerned that Albany and the governor will be given too much control, so too little dollars will get to the ground, and there'll be too much inefficiency and waste. When I go to Washington, we're going to be holding both the federal administration, but also Albany accountable. If we're spending your taxpayer money on a particular issue, it ought to get to that issue. If we're spending it to replace bridges and improve highways, we have to be sure that effectively it gets there. As far as Build Back Better, please stop. They recklessly print and spend dollars that we don't have, and they're using it to transform our economy too quickly. And what's occurring is over-reliance on foreign entities that don't have our best interests. So products, goods, services, natural resources, all being brought in from other countries that in most cases are at least aggressive towards us, if not enemies entirely. And so that reliance and that printing of money and that forcing of federal dollars onto the ground is driving up debt while at the same time weakening the American economy. And it's creating the highest inflation rate in 40 years. We're at now 8.3% inflation year over year, among the highest in 40 years. We're seeing increased utility prices, highest we've seen in generations. Mortgage rates are inching towards double digits. And all of this is going, one, to collapse on itself, but more importantly, its effective It's effectively challenging, harming, and making more difficult life for the average small business family and farmer. And so my belief is if the federal government, if any government's going to spend money for a particular purpose, they have to prove it's going to get effectively towards that purpose. And every dollar we spend, Congress spends a lot of time evaluating the cost of spending your money on itself. And basically, how much does this cost to government? They don't spend enough time asking the question, how does this dollar affect, how does this cost affect the average business family or farmer? And that's something that I'm going to make perfectly clear as my mission. If we're going to spend a dollar, we better be damn sure we know how it's going to be spent. We better get the return on the investment. If we don't, we shouldn't spend money, which is the significant difference between me and whoever else they're going to run. I believe that if we don't need taxpayer money, we shouldn't take it. And when we can give it back, it should go back in your pockets. And doing that while also making smart investments is important. Washington is not making smart investments. They're making reckless spending and ultimately driving up costs on too many people.
Does Powell and the Fed, do they need to get together and maybe get a little tougher with interest rates now, or might that set off a recession?
Well, that's the issue. We have a problem. So you would use interest rates to temper inflation, but at the same time, you have the one area that is effectively, the one industry that's effectively growing is real estate. So then you have this as you raise rates, that will have an impact on obviously on borrowing and that borrowing investing, and then beyond that, the impact to the real estate market. If we have both inflation and the potential of recessionary conditions, that is a crisis that we've not experienced in a long time. In many countries that look more socialist than we do have lived through, and they don't survive very well. And so the federal government better get serious about monetary policy, strengthening the dollar, but also ensuring that we're not recklessly driving up inflation. There are some, and I know we want to get to other stuff, we will. There are some who will say that inflation is global, that this isn't unique to America. The only problem with that argument, while some of that is true, America's inflationary impact is higher than most European countries. So we have this added burden that's created by federal spending, and that doesn't even take into account New York State. New York, inflationary costs in New York are even higher than in the rest of America, while we lag behind the rest of the country in job restoration, economic growth, and all of that is uniquely challenging. And if I can be a voice for New Yorkers in upstate New York to push back against reckless policies in Washington and bad decisions in Albany, I'm going to do it. And we do it from the perspective that we just can't afford it. Ordinary people can't afford it. I grew up poor. I grew up on food stamps. I thankfully had my grandparents nearby to help my mom for the years that she was single, and we struggled to pay our bills. I get it. I live it. And I understand the challenge. There are far too many politicians that are just waking up today saying, oh, yeah, that's right. Inflation's bad. Inflation is bad. It's a tax on people who can afford it the least.
Mm-hmm. How do we handle supply shortages? For example, now the latest is no baby formula around the New York metro area and other places around the country. To me, that seems ludicrous that you can't have baby formula around.
Well, first, it's terrifying. I mean, let's be realistic. We can shout about inflation, but there are families at home today who are running out of supply, and maybe their child doesn't latch. Maybe they were unable to breastfeed. Maybe there's a medical reason or some health reason why formula is the only option. This is terrifying. And it's not something that snuck up on us. This has been growing over the past several months. Since January, we've seen growth. We've seen a depletion of supply. Some of that is a factory closed down that the FDA is engaged in. Here's the thing. Government should be effective in what it does. I'm all for ensuring public safety when it comes to food, drugs, and the things and the life we live. But when the federal agency responsible for protecting public health is slow to engage, meaning they didn't catch on till too late, and then it's slow to aggressively engage in the investigation to turn the plant around, make it safe, and ensure the product can get back on the shelves. That's also government inefficiency and dysfunction, and that's something I don't have a lot of tolerance for. So the federal government has to get that FDA investigation done. It has to move forward. In fact, it said that Abbott is the company that's been dealing with their closure, said it could actually produce certain formulas, but the federal government hasn't given it the green light to move forward. So you've got to move that forward to get product back on the shelves. I think you work with the other companies that make up a smaller segment of the economy, a smaller segment of the supply, to try to ramp up supply, and then do what we're doing. Reach out to doctors' offices, hospitals, and others that may have unused, unopened, and safe formula or samples, ask them to get them to food pantries and other suppliers so that those families that do need it can access maybe a product that you and I don't need. I've purchased a lot of formula for kids, purchased a lot of formula. And I often had samples and unused product that we donated or gave to a food pantry or shelter or to others. We could be doing those things. The president and federal leaders ought to be doing those things. I don't think they get it. I really don't. And I mean, maybe if you don't buy your groceries, you're someone else is buying your groceries, or you haven't had kids in a while, you don't know how frightening this is. But it truly is. It needs to be confronted.
Marc Molinaro, the Republican conservative candidate for Congress in the 19th Congressional District, covering Dutchess County, much of the Hudson Valley, into Catskills, and up into the Albany area to the Capital District of New York State. Marc Molinaro, Dutchess County executive here on Dutchess Talk Radio. Marc Molinaro, have we done enough as a nation for the war to help the Ukrainians out in the war in Ukraine, to support Ukraine? And how does that tie in with energy independence and, of course, inflation too?
Yeah, so I'll start on the back end and then get to the first end of that question. We ought to be investing in American products, American resources, and American goods, and being reliant on other countries that can effectively shut off supply or drive down supply and then ultimately drive up cost isn't only problematic, it's very dangerous. And now that means whether it's oil and gas or food product or baby formula, where we should be investing here at home. And this is a major and important moment where, after this pandemic, America better have learned a lesson that our supply chains are reliant on other countries that don't often have our interest in mind. And we ought to be investing here. So I think you put Americans first. I think you invest in American natural resources, cleaner. When you extract it here in America, we have much higher regulation and protection. The president is shutting down leases to drive up gas and petroleum production, gas and oil production here in this country. And that's a mistake. You can't rely on, and by the way, then negotiating with countries like Venezuela and wants to re-enter deals with Iran and others, it's a mistake. Now, to get to the bigger question, listen, America ought to be steadfast in its support of democracy. It ought to be steadfast in its opposition to tyrants like Putin. We just have to be very, very careful that we are not engaging in a proxy war or drawn into a war that isn't necessarily ours to fight. So I think humanitarian aid, I think support to the Ukrainian people is important. But if we've got $40 billion to send to Ukraine, we better damn well sure we've got dollars to invest and maybe get formula back on the shelf, or open up and support natural resources here in this country. And that, I think, is the imbalance that we're seeing. And I think average people see it. They want to know why it's okay to print money and ship it overseas. Understandably, we want to protect our interests. We want to ensure that Putin is treated as the tyrant and the monster that he is. No question. But we don't want to get dragged into a war we may never get out of. That's a mistake. And we ought to have the dollars to make the investments here in America as well.
Has Washington done enough to fight COVID?
At this point, it may be doing too much, and that is that I do think you restore balance, give local governments, local community members and residents, citizens, the information they need, the resources they need to make choices in their lives, assess the risk, and move forward. I'm fearful that there are, in particular, Democrat elected officials that want to flip the switch again on mandates and restrictions. I think that's a mistake. At this point, we've got to get treatment greater access to treatment, as you would with a flu or any other virus of that nature, and make sure that people have access to those resources and the information to make choices, to assess the risk and make the choices that benefit them and protect them.
Student debt relief, that's coming, I guess, soon. Joe Biden's going to make a decision on that. It seemed like he tried to table that, like, yeah, in the campaign, I'll do something about that. Maybe I'll do 10,000. He's had a big push from the left now to do 50,000 or just wipe out student debt totally. He seems to be back in the range of maybe 10,000. Should anything be done at all? A lot of people say you're helping out the upper class in this country, not the middle and lower classes, by knocking away even just a little touch of student debt.
So I'm going to correct you. I know the term is middle and lower class, middle or lower income. This country was built by really smart, really educated, and many hardworking individuals who are smart, but never went off to college. And they are not less. And this country continues to treat them as if they are, and that's a mistake. And so whether you chose to go to a community college because that was the best option for you, 4 years because you wanted to try to get that higher degree and ultimately a job to match it, or you're working with your hands, every one of those people is essential. And what Joe Biden and the Democrats are attempting to do is to force the poor and middle class to bail out the costs of educated and in most cases wealthier individuals. And now that's not to say everyone who's got a degree is wealthy. That's not what I'm saying. And so if this effort is to wipe out debt for those who can afford to pay it, that is a mistake. If this effort doesn't control tuition and drive down tuition costs, but rather subsidizes institutions that continue to raise their tuition costs, then that's a mistake. And if this ultimately creates a greater economic crisis, meaning people will borrow money they can't pay, expecting the federal government's going to bail them out, that's a mistake. Helping people get from where they are with their debt, why not drive down interest rates? Why not say instead of the subsidized federal rates that are astronomically too high, why don't we give people a break on those? Why don't we build a payment plan that is safe, that is less expensive for individuals? When you have people paying $3,000 a month in student loan and student debt, that's more than than mortgages with tax dollars combined. Why not do those things to make it clear that we want to help, but we're not going to force people who can afford it the least to bail out those who have at least a higher level of income? Those are the kinds of balanced, and that's the kind of common sense that I think that Washington needs and too often never applies.
Final 5 minutes with Marc Molinaro here on Dutchess Talk Radio. And Marc Molinaro, another key issue, immigration, Title 42, and how that all ties in with the opioid crisis in this country, fentanyl addiction in particular.
If this president undoes Title 42, it is a mistake. We don't have adequate border security. We need it. It's as simple as that. And listen, how you would like to achieve border security, I'm open to that conversation, but it needs to be very clear. You cannot flood into America, nor can you create a scenario, and this president is doing it, where we have a humanitarian crisis at our border and the inability, to provide for our security, but also to watch families and young people and individuals who desperately want to come to this country. Many of them want to engage legally in coming into this country to see the humanitarian crisis. And then in the middle of the night, the federal government moving folks around is just inexcusable. It's unsafe, and it needs to be confronted. And let me say this, what you just referenced, whether it's at our borders or at our ports, America has allowed black market fentanyl into this country, and it is stealing too many lives. There is no question. Countries like China have turned a blind eye to this invasion, and it is the crisis of our lifetime. There are far too many who are being impacted by fentanyl. This county, Dutchess County, has an effective response, but we can't do it. Our drug task force, law enforcement, our treatment and prevention intervention, most comprehensive any county in America. But we're not going to be able to do it unless the federal government takes seriously all of those drugs, that illicit, that illegal, and that very dangerous product coming into this country. And you need to stand up to China, and you need to stand up to our enemies who are allowing it to come into this country to prey on families and young people especially.
The billion-dollar question, Roe versus Wade, seems like the Supreme Court will turn whether or not abortion can, or should be legal over to individual states now. That decision seemingly will come by the end of June officially. Do you think Chuck Schumer and the Democrats could actually get some kind of codifying of Roe v. Wade if they were willing to work with the Murkowski-Collins wing of the Republican Party? Or is this just grandstanding by Chuck Schumer now saying, no, I'm not going to do a deal, vote for more Democrats?
Well, here's the thing. I don't and would never assume to understand what goes on in the United States Senate. Neither should you. At the end of the day, here's the way I approach this issue with a great deal of compassion. I know that there are so many who struggle to bring life into this world, and I know there's struggle that many have during pregnancy, and I don't think we should dismiss that. I've always approached this issue from a perspective of protecting innocent life. That's my view, protect life. But also, I've accepted that this has been settled law. I'm waiting for the Supreme Court to actually make a decision. The fact that this was a leaked decision that clearly now is meant to put pressure on justices isn't legal, and it's not appropriate. And so the Supreme Court's in the midst of determining what happens. if they ultimately choose to undo their previous decision on Roe v. Wade. What that means is, of course, the states will be given the right to make those choices. New York State has an expansive access to abortion. I don't embrace late-term abortion like most Americans. I am very uncomfortable and very concerned about the rush to have that broadest of access. But I am hopeful that as a nation, that we will pause and we will talk seriously about the struggles many women have accessing healthcare, that we will talk seriously about the value of life and what we value in life, and that we don't cast aside those people who disagree with us. I know my perspective, and I know my principle and my belief, but it ought to be tempered by a serious conversation about how we treat people in this world. Women struggling to get access, women who want to protect life, women and young people born into the world that are dealing with trauma and abuse, how we deal with mental wellness and disabilities. All of these things, by the way, are really a test of for us as a nation. What do we value about the people we interact with, our lives and livelihoods? And I would say America needs to do a much better job on dealing with and addressing those who live lives that feel absent and avoided and undervalued. All of that should be part of our conversation. And again, I know where I come at from this issue. I know what perspective I come to this issue with. I think that we all ought to use this moment to have a serious conversation about who we are and how we hope to live as a nation and as individuals, and do it with a great deal of compassion.
Dutchess County Executive Marc Molinaro, Republican and conservative candidate for Congress in the 19th Congressional District. We thank you as always, and let's talk again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marc Molinaro. All the best here on Dutchess Talk Radio, produced by Sharc Creative, made possible by Robeson Oil, the house and service built by Michael Labriola, landscape design and construction of our Monkdown in Westchester, also by Hightower Westchester, managing your well-to fiduciary standard up and down all through the Hudson Valley, and by Jaguar Land Rover all throughout the Hudson Valley, and they start their way up the Hudson Valley in New Rochelle, White Plains, and Mount Kisco too. Catch all of our Dutchess Orange, Putnam, Rockland, Westchester, and Fairfield County talk radio programming on our YouTube channel, Sharc Creative YouTube.